Welcome to The Explainer. There's this paradox right at the heart of the Christian faith, and it's all about the difference between being set free and actually living free. So today, we're going to break down this whole idea of liberty versus bondage straight from Galatians chapter 5.
So let's just start with this big question that this ancient text really makes you ask yourself. What does it actually mean to be free? I mean, is it just doing whatever you feel like, whenever you want, or is there something more to it? Well, this chapter has a really specific answer, and honestly, it might surprise you.
All right, so here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll look at the call to freedom. Then, the trap of legalism that threatens it. After that, the battle this creates inside you, what that battle looks like on the outside, and finally, how to actually walk free. Let's get into it.
Okay, so right out of the gate, this chapter makes this huge, powerful statement. It's about a very specific kind of freedom that, get this, has already been won.
And boom, here's the core command. And right away, there's a paradox. You see the language here? It doesn't say go out and achieve your freedom. No, it frames freedom as something that's already done, a gift you've received. So the real challenge isn't about earning it. It's about standing your ground in it and not getting tangled back up in the junk you were supposedly freed from.
And this is where the text makes a really, really important distinction. We tend to think of liberty as freedom to do whatever we want, right? But the freedom being talked about here, it's totally different. It's a freedom from things. Freedom from that crushing pressure of having to earn your way to God, and freedom from all that baggage of guilt and condemnation.
So, if this freedom is a gift, what's the biggest threat? Well, the text warns about something it calls a yoke of bondage. And what's so interesting is that it's not some enemy out there. It's a mindset in here.
So what is this yoke exactly? Well, we usually call it legalism. It's this idea that if you can just follow all the rules, do all the rituals, check all the boxes, then you'll be right with God. The source calls it this frustrating, tangled-up system of trying to justify yourself, and it argues that instead of making you righteous, it actually makes you a slave all over again.
And just to give you an idea of how heavy that burden is, the source points out that Jewish teachers counted 613 individual commandments in the law of Moses. Can you just imagine trying to perfectly keep track of over 600 rules every single day? That's the kind of weight we're talking about here.
The source material has this perfect story to illustrate this. It's about a woman who was a slave, and even after she was legally freed after the Civil War, her old master tricked her into thinking she was still his slave. So even though she was free on paper, she was still living in bondage. And the argument here is that's exactly what happens to us spiritually when we put our trust in rules instead of just resting in grace.
And this is where we get this powerful new take on a phrase you've probably heard, falling from grace. Now, you might think that means messing up, committing some big sin. But in this context, no. The commentary says it's about walking away from grace as the whole operating system for your life. It's choosing to go back to that old system of trying to perform and follow rules to get right with God.
So this tension, grace versus legalism, freedom versus rules, this isn't just some abstract theological idea. The text says, no, this is a real constant battle that's happening inside of you.
It's basically described as an internal civil war. Inside every single believer, you've got these two opposing forces just battling it out. The flesh is pulling you one way, and the spirit is pulling you in the exact opposite direction. They are, like the verse says, totally contrary to one another.
Okay, and it's super important we get what the flesh means here. We're not talking about your physical body, your skin and bones. Think of it as that inner part of you that was programmed for rebellion. Your old nature. It's kind of like the factory default setting of our broken humanity, separate from the new nature a believer gets in Christ. And the result of this inner fight? Well, it's something I think we can all relate to. The source points out that when the flesh is winning that battle, you find yourself not doing the very things you actually want to do. It's that classic feeling, right? You know what the right thing is, but you feel this powerful pull to do the complete opposite.
So, what does this internal battle actually look like on the outside? I mean, how do you know which side is winning? Well, the text gives us two very different and very clear lists of evidence.
Now, you've got to pay close attention to the wording here because it tells you everything. The flesh produces works, plural, like a bunch of separate things we try to crank out on our own. But the Spirit, it produces fruit, singular. The source uses the analogy of a cluster of grapes.
It's not a to-do list of virtues you have to check off. It's one unified character that just grows when you're connected to the right source.
So the source breaks down these works of the flesh into a few groups. First up, you have sins related to sensuality and religion. Things like sexual immorality, impurity, worshiping anything other than the true God, and then sorcery, which is super interesting because the Greek word is pharmakia, which is where we get our word pharmacy. It was directly linked to drug use in occult rituals.
And then there's the second group. And this one is all about how we treat other people. You know, interpersonal stuff. A spirit of constant arguing, losing your temper, selfish ambition, and envy. It's basically a life that's always asking, okay, but what's in it for me?
But then you get this huge contrast, the fruit of the Spirit. And again, remember, this is not a checklist. It's a description of what grows. It all starts with love. And we're talking about agape love here, a love that's a choice, not just a feeling. And from that one thing, everything else flows. A joy that isn't based on what's happening around you. A deep sense of peace, patience, and self-control.
So, okay, you've got this internal battle with these really serious real-world consequences. The good news is, the chapter doesn't just leave you there. It wraps up with some super clear, practical advice on how to actually live out this freedom every day.
And this is the big strategic shift. The answer to fighting the works of the flesh isn't just to grit your teeth and try harder to follow the rules. Nope. The answer is to purposely line up your daily life, your walk, with the Spirit who gave you life in the first place. Put another way, let the one who gave you life be the one who directs your steps. So the source breaks it down into this practical three-part process. Number one is a decisive action. Crucify the flesh. And that's not a passive thing. It's a daily choice to say no to its passions and desires. Number two is an ongoing dependence. Walk in the Spirit. The Greek really means something like keep in step with Him. And last, there's a warning. Don't get all proud and conceited about your spiritual walk. And look, the text makes it clear the stakes here are incredibly high. There's a really stark warning that if your life is just habitually characterized by these works of the flesh, it's a sign you haven't really grabbed hold of this freedom at all. And the commentary really hammers this point home. The key word is practice. We're talking about a continual lifestyle, not just slipping up now and then. So it all comes back to that central paradox, doesn't it? Real freedom isn't a license to just do whatever you want. In fact, the text argues that that just leads you right back into being a slave to your own desires. So the final challenge, the big takeaway, is a question for you to think about. Is your life defined by the fruit that grows out of the Spirit's freedom, or by the works that come from building your own cage?